Greenwood Oaks retirement community was the kind of place you'd expect to be quiet at dusk. But that night, as the final orange rays slipped through stained glass windows and shadows thickened in the long corridors, tension ran like an electric current just beneath the surface. Nurses' shoes squeaked softly. Residents shuffled along, exchanging tired greetings. The smell of dinner, overcooked chicken, wilted peas, lingered in the air. But in the middle of it all was Jessica Reed, new to Greenwood Oaks, trying to hide how out of place she felt. She'd only been here 2 weeks, not long enough to learn the unspoken rules, but just long enough to know there were things people didn't say out loud. Jessica was never alone during her rounds. Atlas, a retired German Shepherd canine therapy dog, padded at her side, his thick fur streaked with gray but his movements precise and full of purpose. To the residents, Atlas was a celebrity. Some called him Sergeant, others Guardian. Jessica had been told he could sense things others missed, which sounded like an old wives' tale until that night. As they turned the corner near the east wing, Atlas suddenly stopped. His whole body stiffened, fur along his spine bristling. Jessica followed his line of sight. They were in front of room 209. The door was sealed tight, a faint strip of yellow caution tape pressed across the frame. Official-looking, yet ignored by most. The number itself, 209, seemed to hum in the half-light, pulling attention. Atlas lowered his head and let out a low, primal growl, a sound so deep it vibrated in Jessica's bones. Conversation in the hallway cut off. An older resident, Mr. Harris, dropped his mug with a sharp clatter. 2 nurses exchanged hurried glances. The head nurse, Mrs. Givens, materialized at Jessica's elbow, her voice tight. "Keep moving, Jess." "Don't linger here." A few others whispered, "That dog knows things." Atlas wouldn't budge. Jessica bent down, her hand on his collar, feeling his muscles taut as cables. Every instinct in her body screamed to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen the flicker of movement inside the room, the shadow crossing behind drawn curtains. But Atlas stayed planted, his stare fixed on the door. The silence stretched, thick, expectant, charged. Jessica's heart pounded. She tried to breathe, but her chest felt tight, like she was already in trouble for something she didn't understand. Finally, Mrs. Givens leaned in closer, her voice low enough only Jessica could hear. "If you want to last here, don't ask questions about the East Wing. Some rooms are best left locked." That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the hallway scene, Atlas's growl, the coldness in Mrs. Givens's eyes, the murmurs that followed them down the corridor. She noticed that every time she passed a staff member the next morning, they seemed to size her up differently. The sense of being watched pressed in from all sides. She tried to tell herself she was imagining it, but Atlas's behavior said otherwise. He was restless, sticking close to her even when she tried to set him at ease with treats or gentle words. Then, sometime after midnight, Jessica heard a faint scratching at her door. Her breath caught. She waited, heart racing. Another scratch, then silence. She forced herself out of bed, stepping lightly, listening for any sound in the hallway. Nothing. On the floor, just beneath the threshold, was a folded piece of paper. No envelope, no name, just a single line, written in a jagged scrawl. "Stay out of the East Wing." Jessica's hand trembled as she tucked the note into her pocket. She could feel Atlas's eyes on her, dark and steady in the glow from the hallway. For a long moment she just stood there, the warning echoing in her mind. The next morning, the atmosphere in Greenwood Oaks was different. Breakfast chatter was muted. Staff avoided Jessica's gaze. Atlas lingered by her side, more alert than usual, every muscle taut with anticipation. When she passed room 209 again, she caught a glimpse of a figure moving behind the curtains. Just a flicker, gone before she could be sure she'd seen anything at all. As she made her rounds, the questions multiplied. Why was that room sealed? Why did the staff act so nervous? Why warn her and not anyone else? But the biggest question was the one that gnawed at her, silent and insistent. What was Atlas trying to tell her, and was she brave enough to listen? By the time dusk fell again, Jessica knew she wouldn't be able to let it go. She glanced at Atlas, who met her gaze with an intensity that made her heart clench. Whatever was waiting behind room 209, it was clear. They were in this together. And as fear pressed in, a tiny ember of hope flickered. Atlas was here, and maybe that meant she wasn't as alone as she felt. The clock on the deserted nurses' station glowed 2:53 a.m., close enough to the witching hour that the world seemed subtly off-kilter. Jessica sat alone, filling out medication logs by fluorescent light. The air felt thick, and Greenwood Oaks was quieter than usual. Even the ticking of the ancient wall clock seemed cautious, reluctant to break the silence. Atlas lay at her feet, but he wasn't sleeping. Every few minutes his ears would prick and he'd lift his head, eyes darting toward the shadowy east wing. Jessica could sense his unease radiating through the leash. It was contagious, her own nerves jangling with every creak and distant footstep. The previous night's warning still sat heavy in her pocket. Stay out of the east wing. She'd turned the paper over and over, searching for a clue, a signature, a hidden mark. Nothing. Just that slashing handwriting and the unspoken promise of consequences. She tried to lose herself in her routine. Pill counts, blood sugar logs, temperature charts, anything to anchor her in the ordinary. But as she double-checked the medication orders, something pricked her attention. The same name, Clara H., kept popping up for pain medication. Except Clara H. had passed away 6 months ago, her room cleared out and belongings boxed for storage. There were other names too, Henry F., Iris P., familiar in a way that made her skin crawl, because she remembered attending their funerals. Jessica frowned and flipped back through the records. Orders kept coming in, signed by staff who hadn't worked the night shift in years. Some entries were in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Others were scrawled as if in a hurry. The more she looked, the less sense it made. Every rule she'd been taught screamed at her. Double-check, escalate, don't ignore anomalies. But something about Greenwood Oaks had taught her that not all rules were welcome here. A sudden tap at the window made her jump. She peered out, nothing but the garden, drowned in fog. She turned back, heart racing, only to find Atlas on his feet, hackles raised. He stared down the corridor toward room 209, a deep rumble growing in his chest. Then a faint flicker, light from under the door of room 209 like a dying flashlight beam, snapping off and on. Jessica's hands went cold. She stood, curiosity battling with fear, but the corridor was empty except for the hush of breathing walls and the hum of old wiring. Atlas strained at the leash, nose twitching, body tense with purpose. Jessica felt the urge to follow, but her mind spun with warnings. Mrs. Givens, the note, those eyes in the curtains. Still, something pulled her on. She reached the end of the hall just as a janitor came around the corner, pushing a creaky cart. He wore the standard blue coveralls and a tired expression, but he moved too quickly, not meeting her eyes. As he passed, Atlas lunged, barking sharply. The custodian jumped, dropping his ring of keys, which skittered across the floor. Jessica's pulse hammered as she knelt to help, but Atlas sniffed out one particular key. He pressed his nose to it insistently. The tag was old, letters almost rubbed away. 209. The janitor snatched the keys back, his voice tight. Careful with that dog. He bites? Jessica steadied Atlas, keeping her voice calm. Only if he senses trouble. The custodian's face twitched. He walked off quickly, disappearing into the shadows beyond the nurse's station. Atlas whined, circling where the key had fallen, then lay down with his head between his paws, gaze fixed on the sealed door. Jessica crouched, stroking his fur. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" she whispered. Back at the station, her hands shook as she returned to the logs. She couldn't ignore the wrongness anymore. She flipped through the folders, searching for something, anything that might explain the falsified orders. Halfway through, she found a delivery receipt tucked between pages. It was yellowed at the edges, barely legible, but the signature at the bottom froze her breath. Ruth Carter. Jessica's memory flashed with the image of Ruth, gentle, bird-like hands, always humming old jazz tunes. Ruth had passed away 2 years ago, her obituary pinned to the staff board for weeks. But the date on the receipt was yesterday. The hair on Jessica's arms stood up. She scanned the rest of the sheet. Routine medications, signed off for room 209. The signature was unmistakable. Was Ruth still alive? Or was someone using her name as a cover? Why would anyone do that? Her mind reeled. She glanced at Atlas, who watched her with worried eyes. The questions spun faster now. What was happening in room 209? What had she stumbled into? And why was her discovery making her feel hunted? Footsteps echoed at the end of the hall. 2 sets, deliberate, heavy. Jessica snapped the logbook shut and slid the receipt into her pocket, heart thudding. She flicked off the nurse's station light, ducking behind the counter as the footsteps grew louder. Atlas pressed close, silent as stone. A pair of nurses passed by, deep in whispered argument. "We can't keep hiding the logs. Someone's going to notice. Let management handle it. If anyone asks, we don't know a thing." Jessica waited until the voices faded, nerves buzzing. Atlas licked her hand, grounding her. When she finally made it back to her room, dawn was breaking. She pressed her forehead to the cold window glass, watching fog curl over the garden. The evidence in her pocket burned against her thigh. She could feel the danger rising, but there was no going back. Atlas curled up beside her as she sat on the bed, sleep impossible. Jessica's mind played out the scene again and again. The falsified orders, the dead patients' names, the mysterious key, the receipt signed by a ghost. The sense of something monstrous lurking just out of sight grew stronger with every heartbeat. She had a choice to make: stay silent and safe, or follow the truth wherever it led, even into the dark. Atlas nudged her hand, as if urging her on. Jessica swallowed hard, determination mixing with fear. "All right, boy, we're not backing down." And for the first time since arriving at Greenwood Oaks, she felt a spark of resolve, fragile, but real. The shadows might be thick, but she was no longer alone in the dark. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when Jessica slipped down the east wing, heart knocking against her ribs. Most of Greenwood Oaks was still asleep, the halls painted in watery blue light. Atlas walked ahead, every step measured, nose to the ground as if following an invisible scent. The 209 key, newly pilfered from the janitor's ring, felt impossibly heavy in her pocket. Jessica paused outside room 209, hand trembling as she slid the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked louder than she expected. Atlas pressed close, his body heat grounding her as she pushed open the door. Inside, the room was a world apart from the rest of the facility. Blankets were tacked up over the windows, sealing out daylight. Boxes and notebooks were stacked in chaotic towers, plastic water bottles rolled underfoot. The air reeked of stale sweat and antiseptic. Jessica's breath caught as her eyes adjusted to the gloom. Someone was in here, someone alive. He crouched in a far corner, knees pulled to his chest, head ducked behind a barricade of empty boxes. Hair thin and gray, skin drawn tight over sharp cheekbones, the man looked like he'd been hiding for years. His eyes, pale and wild, darted between Jessica and Atlas, every muscle coiled for flight. Jessica raised both hands, palms out, forcing calm into her voice. "My name is Jessica. I'm a nurse here. I'm not going to hurt you. This is Atlas. He's here to help." The man flinched as Atlas approached, but didn't run. Instead, something in him seemed to loosen as Atlas sat, calm and non-threatening, a silent invitation to trust. With shaking hands, the man reached out, burying trembling fingers in Atlas's fur. His breathing slowed, the panic in his gaze replaced by something desperate, hope, battered and uncertain. Jessica crouched beside them, careful not to startle him. "Can you tell me your name?" He stared at the floor. After a long pause, he rasped, "Walter. Walter Evans." The silence after that was thick. Jessica's mind raced. Walter wasn't on any resident lists. She'd never seen him in the cafeteria or group activities. Yet here he was, hidden in plain sight, surviving off bottled water and the crumbs of someone else's world. Atlas pressed closer, tail wagging gently. Walter clung to him, whispering words Jessica couldn't quite catch. Tears slipped down his cheeks, leaving clean streaks in the grime. Jessica's throat tightened. She doubted her instincts, convinced herself she was imagining things. Now the truth was undeniable. Walter had been deliberately hidden. "I want to help," she said quietly, "but you have to help me understand. Why are you here, Walter? Who's keeping you hidden?" Walter's voice shook. "They said we'd never get out, that it wasn't safe. But you—" He broke off, eyes brimming with a pain too deep for words. "You brought Atlas. He always finds the lost ones." Jessica blinked back her own tears. She thought of the rumors, the warnings, the falsified medication logs. "Who's they, Walter? Is someone hurting you?" He shook his head violently. "Not hurting, watching, waiting. They test us. I see the files, names, faces. Some are gone now. Others, they don't remember who they are anymore." Atlas shifted, resting his head on Walter's knee. The man's shaking stilled, the dog's presence working a quiet kind of magic. Jessica noticed a battered notebook wedged beneath Walter's mattress. "What's that?" she asked gently. Walter hesitated, then pushed it toward her. "Write everything down, in case I forget." Jessica thumbed through the pages, her hands shaking. Names filled every line, many she recognized from the records she'd reviewed. Ruth Carter, Henry F. Iris P. At the bottom of a page, scrawled in a childlike hand, she read, Project Nightlight, terminated, not forgotten. Her blood ran cold. She remembered that name from the old files, a phrase repeated in strange places, never explained. Atlas nuzzled her arm, breaking the spell. Jessica looked at Walter, whose eyes pleaded for understanding. I promise I won't let anything happen to you, Jessica whispered. But we have to get you out of here. And I need to know who else is at risk. Walter shook his head, panic returning. They watch. Cameras everywhere. The man in the brown suit, he knows. He said if I left, Ruth would disappear forever. Ruth Carter? Jessica asked, her voice catching. Walter nodded, gripping Atlas's fur until his knuckles whitened. She's still here, but not herself. They keep her in the dark. I hear her singing sometimes, old songs like she's trying to remember. Jessica's mind whirled. If Ruth was alive, if she was being kept somewhere in this building, the stakes were even higher. Her skin prickled with urgency, but she forced herself to move slow, to let Walter set the pace. She couldn't risk scaring him deeper into silence. Walter, she said softly, I'm going to find her, but I need your help. Will you trust me? He swallowed hard, looking from Jessica to Atlas and back. Then for the first time he nodded. Jessica's guilt pricked sharp. She'd doubted herself, doubted Atlas, doubted the whispers she'd overheard in darkened hallways. Now she felt the weight of her promise settle onto her shoulders, heavier than fear, but steadier too. She would not back down. Atlas pressed himself close to both of them, tail thumping softly. For the first time, Walter smiled, a small, fractured thing, but real. Atlas always finds the lost ones, he repeated, voice steadier. Jessica slid the notebook into her bag, heart hammering. She didn't know who she could trust, but she knew one thing. The time for silence was over. She stood, meeting Walter's eyes. We'll come back tonight. We'll get Ruth and we'll get out. I swear. Walter's voice was a whisper. They won't let us go. Jessica's resolve hardened. We're not asking. As she led Atlas out of the shadows, the first light of morning pressed through the cracks in the blankets. For the first time since arriving at Greenwood Oaks, Jessica felt hope, raw, fragile, but alive. The game had changed, and she was done being afraid. Dawn broke gray and heavy, mist pressing against the windows of Greenwood Oaks. Jessica barely slept. The memory of Walter's terror haunted her, and every so often she'd hear Atlas pacing the length of her room, his claws ticking out her own restlessness. It wasn't just fear for herself anymore. Walter's notebook, names, details, and the phrase Project Nightlight lay on the nightstand, pages still vibrating with unspoken stories. When her shift started, Jessica moved through her tasks on autopilot. She played the part of the attentive nurse, checking charts, smiling at residents, even laughing with Mr. Harris about his lost crossword book. But beneath the surface, every cell strained toward the east wing, to room 209 and the shadow of Ruth Carter. Atlas sensed it, sticking close at her side, never letting his gaze drift far from the hall's end. That afternoon, Jessica ducked into the empty supply closet. Walter waited inside, huddled near the shelves of gauze and antiseptics. He looked different in the daylight, less ghostly, more human, but his eyes darted to the door every time footsteps echoed by. He clutched a battered notebook to his chest, the word help barely legible on the cover. Jessica pressed a gentle hand to his shoulder. We need to find Ruth, tonight. Do you know how to get to her? Walter nodded shakily. There's a door, not a real one, in 209, behind the wall. Ruth's, on the other side. They only open it at night. Can you show me? She whispered. Walter hesitated, then nodded again. But we have to hurry. The man in the brown suit, he checks every morning. If he finds you, he'll... Walter broke off, hugging himself. Jessica nodded, heart pounding. We'll be careful. We'll bring Atlas. Late that night, with most of Greenwood Oaks dozing or glued to late-night TV, Jessica crept down the corridor with Atlas and Walter. Every shadow seemed to twitch. A cleaning cart rattled in the distance. A nurse's laugh from the common room trailed away as the three slipped silently into room 209. Jessica closed the door behind them, locking it with the stolen key. The air inside was thick, the blinds drawn tight. Walter moved straight to the far wall, running trembling fingers along the wallpaper until he found a seam behind a bookshelf. Together, he and Jessica slid the shelf aside, revealing a jagged crack. Jessica's pulse hammered as Walter peeled back the wallpaper, exposing a sleek black panel, like something from a sci-fi movie, embedded in the wall. A scanner? Jessica breathed. Walter nodded, voice quivering. Thumbprint. Only mine works. I don't know why. He pressed his thumb against the glass. The panel blinked green, then slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. Cold air rolled out, so cold Jessica saw her breath. The soundproofed silence on the other side was almost painful. Atlas growled, deep and low, but pressed forward, nose twitching. Jessica and Walter moved into the darkness, the door whispering closed behind them. The corridor narrowed, lined with thick insulation. Walter led, hand on the wall. This was the testing room. I used to hear screaming, but never Ruth's voice. She only sang softly, like she was comforting herself. At the end of the hall, another door. This one was steel, no window, just a lock and a faded label, 210. Jessica steeled herself, then pushed the door open. Inside, the room was freezing. It was empty except for a hospital gurney, medical equipment gleaming, and a woman, pale, barely conscious, strapped down with broad canvas belts. Her hair was wild, streaked with gray, and a bracelet marked Subject 13A dug into her wrist. Jessica staggered back, the horror clawing up her throat. Ruth Carter, alive but altered. Walter let out a keening cry and rushed to her side, his hands shaking so badly he almost couldn't undo the first strap. Ruth, it's me. Walter. I'm here. I promised I'd find you. Ruth didn't respond, but her eyelids fluttered. Atlas approached, nosing her gently, then pressing his head to her arm in a gesture of pure comfort. For the first time, Ruth's hand moved, fingers twitching against Atlas's ear. She didn't speak, but a soft hum, a broken melody, filled the air, jazz notes twisted by memory and medication. Jessica scanned the room. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled in code. She yanked open the nearest. Stacks of files, photos of residents, medical histories, all marked with the words, Project Nightlight. Memory suppression, progress variable. One file, thick with notes, was marked Carter Ruth. Jessica flipped through it. Every page chilled her. Medication lists, test schedules, notes signed off by Dr. Simon Mallory, the facility's head physician. Experiments on memory, treatments meant to erase, no consent forms, only cold clinical observations. Subject responds to jazz music. Shows emotional distress during memory recall, continue suppression protocol, transfer pending. Jessica's hands shook with fury and heartbreak. How could they do this? Walter sobbed as he freed Ruth's other arm. She was my friend. She told me stories. Then one day she just forgot me. They said it was dementia, but it wasn't. It was them. Atlas lay down beside the gurney, resting his head in Ruth's lap. Her trembling hand moved, brushing his fur. For a moment she stilled. Jessica caught a glimpse of something alive behind her eyes. Pain, confusion, but also a flicker of recognition. Walter's tears fell onto Ruth's hand. I thought I lost you, he whispered. Jessica squeezed his shoulder. We're getting her out. All of you. This ends tonight. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the main hall, a heavy, deliberate tread. Jessica's blood ran cold. They had to move. Now. She stuffed the files into her bag, unstrapped Ruth from the gurney, and helped her sit up. Ruth blinked, dazed, but Atlas's steady presence calmed her. Walter wiped his eyes. The side door, through the kitchen. It's our only chance. Jessica nodded, urgency pounding in her veins. She met Walter's gaze, terrified, but shining with hope. We're not leaving anyone behind. In that freezing room, in the presence of so much suffering, Jessica felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about refusing to look away, even when the truth was unbearable. They pressed forward, Walter, Jessica, Atlas, and Ruth, out of the shadows into the unknown, clinging to hope. Sunrise brought no comfort. Greenwood Oaks' usual routine, bingo, morning pills, gossip in the cafeteria, was a thin mask stretched over panic. Jessica felt every nerve raw as she made her rounds. Each hallway seemed too long, every door too quiet. Ruth was hidden in a private room now, withdrawn and weak, Walter hovering by her side like a guardian shadow. Atlas stayed alert, never far from either of them, as if he understood the fragile balance holding everything together. But the biggest change was the watchers. Jessica felt them everywhere. Cameras that hadn't worked in years now blinked red in the corners. Staff glanced at her with wary, sidelong eyes. She caught scraps of whispers. The new nurse, she's digging. Management isn't happy. Every step felt like it might be her last as an employee. It all came to a head in the security office, late morning. Jessica, summoned under the guise of routine paperwork, found herself sitting across from a man in a brown suit with a jagged scar running from his cheekbone to his ear. He had the bored patience of someone used to being obeyed. She recognized him instantly from Walter's description. He clicked through security camera feeds on his tablet, each screen flickering with images of residents, hallways, empty common rooms. "Miss Reed," he said, voice so flat it could have been machine-made, "we take patient safety very seriously here. We expect our staff to follow protocol. Lately there's been confusion, missing medication, unusual visitors at night. Have you noticed anything strange?" Jessica kept her voice even. "Patients are anxious. Some records don't match. I'm just doing my job, sir." The man watched her over steepled fingers. "We have to keep this place running smoothly. It wouldn't do for rumors to get out." "You understand?" Atlas, lying at Jessica's feet, lifted his head and let out a warning growl, low, sharp, a sound that stopped conversation in its tracks. The man's gaze flickered to the dog, then back to Jessica. "You know, animals can sense trouble. Sometimes they cause it." He smiled without warmth. Jessica resisted the urge to shudder. She made her excuses and left quickly, Atlas at her side. Her hands were clammy, the threat lingering in the air like smoke. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease. Walter wouldn't leave Ruth's side, his hands trembling every time footsteps echoed in the hall. Ruth herself was drifting, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost, clutching Atlas's fur for comfort. Jessica tried to work as normal, but her mind raced. Was the brown-suited man watching her now? Were staff loyal or scared? The fear of exposure pressed in, suffocating. That evening, after lights out, Jessica heard voices in the staff lounge. She edged close, pressing herself against the wall, Atlas silent at her side. She recognized Mrs. Givens, the head nurse, and a maintenance man with a heavy key ring. "She's seen too much. If Ruth wakes up, everything falls apart," Mrs. Givens whispered, her voice frantic. The maintenance man grunted. "Orders are to move her tonight, 3 a.m., special transport. After that, loose ends get tied up. We can't risk any more leaks." Jessica's breath froze. Tied up. The words rattled in her chest. They were planning to disappear Ruth, and maybe Walter, maybe all of them. Atlas shifted, as if to bark, but Jessica laid a gentle hand on his head. "Not yet." She slipped away, heart in her throat, making her way to the tiny nurse's office where Walter was curled up, eyes wide, next to Ruth's cot. "We have to go tonight," she whispered. "They're coming for Ruth." Walter looked sick with fear, but determination flashed in his eyes. "You have a plan?" Jessica nodded, though it was only half-formed. "I'll distract them. Walter, you help Ruth get ready. Atlas will help cover us. When the power flickers for shift change, we make for the back exit." Walter swallowed hard, then took Ruth's cold hand in his own. "We won't leave you behind, Ruth. Not ever again." Jessica moved quickly. She searched the file she'd grabbed from room 210, desperate for anything that might help. In the pile, she found what she needed, evidence that Ruth was scheduled for a transfer at 3 a.m., medical records marked with code words she now understood. Removal, erasure, no return. It was hospital speak for vanishing. She copied the documents, tucking them into her uniform. Walter and Ruth huddled together, Atlas resting between them, a silent shield. As midnight approached, tension in the building reached a fever pitch. The brown-suited man walked the halls, talking softly into a phone, face grim. Nurses pretended not to see. Jessica's every move was watched. Every smile from a resident returned with a worried glance. Atlas stayed by the window, muscles tense, eyes following every shadow. He seemed to sense something coming, something dangerous. A storm gathered outside, thunder grumbling in the distance, lightning forking across the dark sky. Every gust of wind rattled the windows, nature echoing the unrest inside. Jessica's heart pounded as the power flickered, the ancient backup generator whining to life. She squeezed Ruth's hand, steady and warm. "When I say go, you don't look back. Walter, you stay close. Atlas will lead." Walter nodded, fierce in his fear. Ruth, her eyes half-focused, squeezed back. At 2:57 a.m., Jessica saw the brown-suited man heading for Ruth's room, security in tow. She slipped out, Atlas at her heels. "Now," she whispered, the word barely a breath. They moved. Down back halls, through the laundry, past rooms where forgotten residents dozed. The entire world shrank to Atlas's silent pause, Walter's rapid breathing, Ruth's shaky steps. They made it to the service exit just as the security alarms blared, the signal that their time was up. But Jessica had the evidence. Walter had his courage, and Atlas had the kind of loyalty that could shatter walls. Tonight, everything would change. They would not go quietly. The world outside had dissolved into a tempest, rain hammering the windows with wild fury. Inside Greenwood Oaks, the emergency lights flickered, casting everything in a watery orange glow. Jessica's heartbeat thudded in her ears, the only rhythm louder than the alarms shrieking down the halls. She steadied herself, holding Ruth upright on one side while Walter supported her other arm. Ruth's head lolled, eyes foggy, but every time she faltered, Atlas nudged her gently forward, his presence a lifeline in the chaos. Jessica's hand shook as she checked the hallway. The brown-suited man and his security team were at the nurse's station, their voices tense, searching, barking orders. The clock above the station blinked 3:04 a.m. We're already out of time. Lightning flashed, illuminating the faces of staff peering from behind doors, some concerned, some just curious, none brave enough to interfere. Jessica motioned to Walter. The kitchen. Now. Atlas led the way, nose to the ground, tail stiff and high. Walter's breath came ragged. He kept glancing over his shoulder, flinching at every sudden footstep. They'll come after us, he whispered. But Jessica pressed forward, a mantra running through her mind. Don't look back. Don't slow down. Don't let them win. The kitchen was deserted except for a night cook startled by the sight of Jessica, Walter, and the barely conscious Ruth. Jessica flashed her badge and tried to sound steady. Emergency evacuation. Leak in the east wing. The cook, uncertain, nodded and ducked out a side door, leaving the path clear. In the kitchen's far corner was a service door, bolted and chained, but, mercifully, not alarmed. Jessica fumbled with the lock, adrenaline making her fingers clumsy. Atlas pressed close, ears flat, eyes fixed on the shadows behind them. Suddenly, shouting erupted in the hall. Footsteps pounded closer. Too many to count. Jessica got the last bolt loose just as a flashlight beam slashed through the darkness behind them. "Stop!" barked the brown-suited man, his voice sharper than the storm. Atlas turned, lips curled, standing broadside between the pursuers and Jessica's group. The security guards hesitated, uncertain in the face of the dog's snarl. Jessica seized the moment, swinging the door open to the wild, rain-lashed night. Wind howled in, rattling pans on their hooks. Walter half-carried Ruth through the opening, Atlas still holding the hallway at bay, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Jessica reached for Atlas's collar, but he stood his ground, refusing to budge. She called, "Atlas, come!" But the dog only flicked his eyes toward her, then back to the threat, as if weighing his own safety against theirs. The brown-suited man advanced, baton raised. Atlas lunged, snapping at his heels. The man stumbled, cursing, swinging wildly but hitting only air. In the chaos, Jessica ducked back inside, grabbed Atlas's collar and hauled him through the door just as security surged forward. She slammed the service door shut, yanking the chain through the bolt and wedging a heavy baking tray through the handle. It wouldn't hold for long, but it didn't have to. They were out. The storm outside was blinding. Rain soaked them instantly, wind tearing at their clothes, Ruth shivering between Jessica and Walter. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the old maintenance road that wound behind the building and into a narrow band of trees. "Stay together!" Jessica shouted, barely audible over the gale. Atlas, though limping slightly, stayed out front, guiding them by instinct. Ruth clung to him, whispering snatches of song through chattering teeth. They stumbled through mud and puddles, slipping on slick roots and fallen leaves. The evidence files, stuffed inside Jessica's raincoat, grew heavy with water, but she clung to them as if they were life itself. She could feel the weight of every name, every falsified chart, every story Walter had recorded in his battered notebook. Behind them, the shouts of the security team grew faint, swallowed by wind and rain. But Jessica knew it wasn't over. Someone would come looking, maybe not tonight, but soon. They needed a plan, a place to regroup. Walter's breath was ragged. "Don't leave me, please," he cried, stumbling as the road curved behind the old tool shed. Jessica tightened her grip on his arm. "You're not alone. We're getting out of this, all of us." Atlas doubled back, pressing his head to Walter's leg as if physically holding him together. A flash of headlights cut through the trees. For one breathless moment, Jessica feared it was security in pursuit. But it was only an old car passing by on the distant road, oblivious to the desperate flight in the shadows. At the edge of the woods, they found a drainage tunnel, a place Walter remembered from before the lockdowns, when residents used to walk the property. "This way," he gasped, guiding them through the narrow, dripping passage. The cold bit into Jessica's bones, but hope blazed in her chest. They emerged, breathless and soaked, on the far side of the property. The facility lights were barely visible through the sheets of rain. No alarms here, no cameras. For the first time all night, Jessica allowed herself to believe. "We're free, for now." Ruth collapsed to her knees, weeping silently. Walter held her close, tears streaming down his own face. Atlas circled them both, nuzzling their hands, his fur muddy and matted but his tail wagging, a signal of victory, however small. Jessica's hands shook as she pulled out the sodden files, laying them flat on a patch of dry concrete beneath the bridge. She looked up at the ragged group. Walter, broken but not defeated. Ruth, lost but still alive. Atlas, injured and tired but radiating pride. "We did it," she whispered, voice rough. "We got out." Lightning flashed, illuminating the faces of her companions. For the first time, Jessica saw something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Not the naive kind, but the fierce, stubborn variety that comes from surviving what should have been impossible. They huddled close beneath the tunnel's arch, the storm still raging around them, but the worst was behind. For now, they had each other. And somewhere ahead, beyond the darkness and the rain, was a new beginning, if they could find the courage to reach for it. The night had wrung every last drop of strength from Jessica, Walter, and Ruth, but by sunrise they were still together, huddled in a run-down motel room on the outskirts of town. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the faded wallpaper. Jessica kept checking the window, watching for unfamiliar cars, while Atlas curled protectively at Ruth's feet, one paw bandaged from a cut he'd picked up in the escape. Walter lay on the bed, shivering beneath a thin blanket, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to burst through the door. Ruth dozed, her hand never leaving Atlas's fur, the only thing that seemed to tether her to the present. Jessica's mind spun. Memories of alarms, the brown-suited man's threat, the rain-soaked dash through the woods. She was bone-tired, but there was no time for rest. She spread the evidence files across the rickety table. Medical records, secret logs, the battered notebook with its list of lost names. It wasn't just paperwork. It was the story of lives taken apart in silence, hope ground down by secrecy. She thought about the warning that had started it all. Stay out of the East Wing. If she'd obeyed, Ruth would be lost. Walter, too. Jessica's hand shook as she made the call. To Nick Harrison, a private investigator her brother had vouched for years ago. "Nick, it's Jess. I need your help. It's about Greenwood Oaks. And it's bad. Really bad." She heard skepticism in his voice at first. But as she listed names, described the illegal treatments and memory-erasing experiments, she heard the change, the silence, the slow intake of breath, the grim resolve. "Stay put," he said. "I'll be there in an hour. Bring everything you've got." While they waited, Jessica tended to Atlas's wounded paw, hands gentle but clumsy with exhaustion. Atlas winced, but didn't pull away, his eyes locked on hers, steady, forgiving. The bandage wound snug. "You saved us, Atlas," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm so sorry you got hurt." Walter began to sob quietly, his body shaking. He pressed his face into the pillow, repeating, "She's safe. She's safe." As if the words alone could keep Ruth with them. Jessica knelt beside him, pressing his hand. "You did everything right, Walter. You brought her back. You brought all of us out." He nodded but didn't speak. Jessica recognized the look, the disbelief, the guilt, the aftershock of fear. Ruth, for her part, blinked in and out of awareness. Sometimes she'd hum an old song, sometimes stare at the wall, but she never let go of Atlas, her anchor in a world that kept shifting. Nick arrived, his presence a jolt of energy in the gloom. He wore a battered jacket, camera bag slung over one shoulder. His handshake was firm but kind. "Let's see what you've got." They pored over the evidence. Forged signatures, medication logs for patients long dead, files labeled Project Nightlight, funding memos from government sources. Nick's eyes grew hard as he read, his jaw clenched. "This isn't just malpractice, Jess. It's criminal. If even half of this holds up, we're looking at years of illegal experimentation and a cover-up that reaches the top. Jessica's resolve returned. We can't let them hide this. We have to make it public. For everyone they hurt. Everyone they might still hurt. Nick nodded. I'll start scanning everything, get copies to a lawyer I trust. You three need to lay low. Once the story breaks, they'll try to discredit you. Are you ready for that? Jessica glanced at Walter and Ruth. Walter looked terrified, but there was a new light in his eyes, a sliver of hope fighting through the fear. We're ready, Jessica said. We don't have a choice. Atlas whined, shifting his weight, and Jessica reached to ruffle his ears. You too, buddy. You're the bravest of all of us. The next days blurred together. Phone calls to lawyers, interviews in quiet corners of the motel, Nick shuttling documents back and forth to trusted contacts. News spread slowly at first, then gained speed. A local reporter, then a city paper, then a national health watchdog picked up the story. Greenwood Oaks went from a dot on the map to a headline overnight. But every step forward brought new danger. Jessica caught sight of strange cars parked across the street. A man in a brown suit loitered at the motel lobby before melting away. Someone called, threatening her if she didn't drop the accusations. Jessica didn't flinch. She had Atlas, she had Walter and Ruth, and now she had the truth on her side. Atlas needed stitches for his paw, a risk, but necessary. At the vet's office, Jessica cradled his head in her lap as the doctor worked. Her gratitude and guilt collided, hot and raw. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she whispered, feeling his steady breath against her hand. You saved all of us, Atlas. I won't let you down. Back at the motel, Walter sobbed in relief when Ruth stirred, finally calling his name in a voice that was small but unmistakably her own. Jessica watched as Walter held Ruth's hand, tears flowing, joy, release, the return of something precious. Nick returned that night, a smile flickering on his lips. We've got enough. I'm taking this to the press in the morning. You're not alone anymore, Jess. Jessica's fear gave way to resolve. Let them come. We're not running. Not this time. Atlas rested at her feet, eyes half closed, still vigilant. The storm outside had finally broken, and a pale moon rose over the battered motel. It was only the beginning, Jessica knew. The fight for justice would be brutal. But for the first time since stepping into Greenwood Oaks, she saw the path forward, a path lit by truth, by courage, and by the silent, steadfast loyalty of a dog who refused to let her fall. The day Jessica never thought would come arrived cold and gray, the courthouse rising up like a fortress in the city's heart. Reporters clustered on the steps, cameras and microphones angled for the perfect shot. Jessica's hands trembled as she stepped from the car, Atlas at her side, Nick walking just behind. Walter and Ruth, flanked by a victim's advocate, shuffled up the stairs together. Walter blinking against the sharp wind, Ruth steadying herself with each careful step. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Greenwood Oaks' administrators, faces pinched and pale, huddled with their lawyers. Dr. Simon Mallory, head physician, wore a suit as crisp as his public image, but his eyes darted between Jessica's group and the press gallery. Behind him, staff who'd enabled years of secrets fidgeted, avoiding Jessica's gaze. The hearing began with routine procedure, introductions, evidence admitted, voices clipped and formal. But when Jessica took the stand, the real battle started. Her hands shook as she placed them on the table, Atlas pressing his chin on her shoe beneath the desk, silent support radiating through his warmth. State your name for the record. Jessica Reed. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to go on, laying out the story piece by piece. The sealed room 209, the falsified medication logs, the missing patients, the night they fled for their lives. With each detail, the courtroom's hush grew heavier. She didn't look at Dr. Mallory or at Mrs. Gibbons, who sat at the back with lips pressed into a hard line. She kept her eyes on Atlas, on Walter and Ruth. What made you pursue this, despite the risk? The prosecutor asked. Jessica hesitated, words catching. It was Atlas, really. He sensed things none of us saw. And then I started seeing them too, the cover-ups, the missing people. I couldn't pretend anymore. I owed it to the residents, and to myself. Atlas's tail thumped once on the floor, the only sound of encouragement she needed. The defense attacked her credibility. Isn't it true, Nurse Reed, that you were new, that you might have misunderstood Greenwood Oaks procedures? She met the lawyer's gaze. If by procedure you mean hiding suffering, falsifying documents, and erasing memories, then yes, I misunderstood. A ripple of unease moved through the gallery. The judge banged the gavel. "Order, please." Nick presented the evidence. Files, photographs, lists of transferred residents whose families had never heard from them again. Medical experts testified to the devastating effects of the memory suppression drugs. Jessica sat beside Atlas as survivor after survivor told their stories, voices quavering, hands clenched but eyes alight with the need to be believed. Walter was next, shaking as he rose, but he didn't falter. "For years they said I was crazy, that what I saw wasn't real, but Ruth, she was proof, so was Atlas. The people in that place, they didn't want the world to know what they'd done." He turned, voice trembling. "I don't want revenge. I want to make sure it never happens again." Ruth's testimony was brief, her words halting, but when she looked up and found Atlas's eyes, she smiled. "He brought me back," she said simply, "and Jessica fought when no one else would." The media exploded. Photos of Atlas, regal and gentle, flashed across screens and newspapers. "Hero therapy dog helps uncover nursing home scandal." Messages poured in, families of former residents, advocates for the elderly, even government officials. A public groundswell grew, demanding accountability, justice, reform. Outside the courthouse, Jessica was swarmed by supporters, strangers pressing her hands, thanking her for courage she didn't feel she'd earned. Survivors' families held up signs. "Remember the forgotten, protect our elders, justice for Greenwood Oaks." The administrators pushed back hard. Dr. Mallory accused Jessica of fabrication, claiming Project Nightlight was a therapeutic pilot, never abusive. His lawyer produced doctored reports, insisted on Jessica's overactive imagination. But the weight of evidence, hundreds of pages, dozens of testimonies, crushed every denial. The tide turned publicly when Atlas attended the government hearing. News outlets lingered on the image. Jessica in her nurse's uniform, gripping Atlas's collar with trembling hands, facing down a panel of suited officials. "My patients were not experiments," Jessica said, voice ragged but clear. "They were parents, teachers, veterans. They deserved compassion, not erasure. Atlas taught me that healing isn't just medicine. Sometimes it's refusing to look away." A hush settled as Congress questioned Dr. Mallory, his evasions growing more desperate. Walter spoke for the first time in front of strangers, reading the names of every lost resident from his notebook. Ruth, voice soft but determined, said, "Don't forget us." That day, the panel ordered a full federal investigation into Greenwood Oaks and all facilities linked to Project Nightlight. Administrators were placed on leave. Dr. Mallory was arrested pending trial. Whistleblowers from other homes came forward, their voices bolstered by Jessica's stand. Later in the hallway, families who'd once been strangers embraced Jessica and Atlas. Walter and Ruth joined the circle, their faces luminous with relief and exhaustion. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, hope spread not as a whisper but as a roar. A rising call for change that began with one nurse, a broken community, and a loyal dog who saw what others could not. As evening fell, Jessica sat on the courthouse steps, Atlas's head in her lap, Nick beside her. Survivors gathered nearby, swapping stories and laughter. For a moment, the shadows of Greenwood Oaks seemed far away. Atlas looked up, his eyes deep and steady, and Jessica let herself believe justice was possible, and healing, no matter how broken, had finally begun. Months had passed since the hearings, yet the echoes of Greenwood Oaks lingered everywhere Jessica went. The world outside felt changed, more alert, more fragile, as if everyone now understood how easily harm could be hidden in places meant to heal. Yet inside Greenwood Oaks, change was no longer just a whisper. It was transformation, lived and breathed by those who had survived. Where fear and secrecy had once ruled, the halls now flooded with sunlight, windows thrown wide, letting in fresh air and the music of laughter. The garden, long neglected, had come alive with blooms, wildflowers planted by survivors' hands, swaying in the breeze. It was here, in a sunlit room overlooking the flowers, that Jessica gathered every week with Walter, Ruth, and other residents, no longer patients, but people with stories worth telling. Jessica led the support circle, her voice softer than it had been in court, but steadier. "We gather because what happened to us matters, because we know the cost of silence." Walter, seated in a patch of sun, gripped the notebook that had once been his shield. For so long, he'd been the invisible man, the haunted one, hiding in the cracks of Greenwood Oaks. Now he spoke for the first time in front of the group, voice thin but unshakable. For years, I thought no one would ever believe me. They said I was confused, that my memories were just broken. But I was wrong. It took one person, and one very brave dog, to listen. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Jessica caught Walter's eye, pride and sadness mingling in her chest. Ruth, sitting nearby, reached over to squeeze his hand. Her own recovery was slow, each day a quiet battle to reclaim fragments of herself. Sometimes she got lost in the middle of a sentence or startled at sudden noises. But today, she smiled, a smile that held more life than Jessica had ever seen in her before. "Some days I still don't remember everything," Ruth said, voice trembling. "But I know I'm safe. I know I matter. Atlas made sure I never forgot that." Atlas lay in the center of the circle, his head turning from person to person, pausing beside Ruth so she could gently stroke his fur. He was older now, the silver in his coat shining in the sunlight, but his presence was as calming as ever. Residents who had once shrunk from touch now reached out for him, his wordless loyalty breaking barriers words never could. Jessica felt a quiet gratitude as she listened to the voices around her, voices that once had been silenced by shame or confusion, now finding their strength. She shared her own journey, eyes sweeping the room. "I used to think keeping quiet was the safest thing, but silence is what allowed all this to happen. I learned that courage isn't just about facing danger. Sometimes it's about refusing to look away, even when the truth is ugly." There was a stillness then, a sacred hush. Jessica saw tears in the eyes of family members who had joined the group, mothers and sons, friends who had once lost hope. The group didn't shy from the hard questions. How do you forgive yourself for surviving when others did not? How do you rebuild trust when trust was what was shattered? They spoke about anger, about guilt, about the small victories that made healing possible. A favorite song remembered, a walk in the garden, the warmth of Atlas's fur after a sleepless night. They spoke of their losses too, the friends whose names still lived in Walter's notebook and whose absence haunted the halls even now. Jessica didn't pretend the wounds were gone, but she saw in every face around her the evidence of something even stronger, the will to heal, together. As the meeting ended, Atlas moved among the group, pausing beside each person. When he stopped in front of a new resident, a woman who had not spoken since arriving, Jessica watched with quiet hope. The woman's hand, hesitant, reached out. Atlas pressed close, tail wagging softly. For the first time, the woman smiled, then laughed, the sound startling everyone into applause. It was a moment of pure renewal, a visible sign that healing, real, messy, unpredictable, had found its way back into Greenwood Oaks. Afterward, Jessica lingered in the garden. Sunlight danced across the wildflowers, and the air was full of music. Someone played piano inside, the notes tumbling through open windows. Walter joined her, closing his notebook for the first time. "It's strange," he said quietly. "All those years, I thought the truth would destroy me, but it was hiding that almost did. You saved us, Jessica. You and Atlas." Jessica shook her head. "We saved each other, Walter. All of us." Ruth appeared, carrying 2 cups of tea. She looked more herself than Jessica had ever seen her, shoulders back, eyes clear. She sat with them, and the three watched Atlas napping in the sun, a gentle giant at peace in the world he'd helped to heal, the cost of silence and the power of voice. That was the lesson Greenwood Oaks carried forward. Abuse had survived when no one spoke. Justice and healing began with a single voice, and a dog who would not walk away from suffering. Healing is a community effort. Recovery wasn't solitary. It was Walter's courage, Ruth's quiet persistence, Atlas's everyday kindness, Jessica's refusal to look away, and the families who learned to hope again. Guardianship beyond the obvious. Atlas had shown that protection wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was a steady presence, a sense of safety that allowed people to come back to themselves. Redefining strength. Bravery was not about the absence of fear, but persistence in spite of it. Walter, Ruth, Jessica, and Atlas had all taught Greenwood Oaks that healing was possible, even for those who had been most wounded. The garden was quiet as the afternoon sun slid low. In that peace, Jessica saw the future, fragile, but theirs. Spring arrived gently at Greenwood Oaks, sunlight spilling across the newly planted memorial garden. The land that once seemed haunted now shimmered with life. Daffodils, wild violets, and the soft hum of bees. On a bright afternoon, Jessica stood among the blooms, smoothing the skirt of her dress, her hands trembling with the kind of nerves that come from hope, not fear. Today was the dedication ceremony. Staff, survivors, families, and neighbors had gathered to unveil the new plaque, a simple bronze square inscribed with names and the words, "In honor of those lost and those who fought for justice, may light outlast every shadow." The garden, once choked with weeds, had become a place of healing, a legacy nurtured by every hand that had reached for the truth. Jessica saw Walter and Ruth first, side by side, each holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Walter wore his best jacket, the notebook that had once catalogued his nightmares now replaced by a single sheet, his speech written in a shaky but determined hand. Ruth looked radiant, her hair pinned back, a quiet strength in her posture that told Jessica she'd reclaimed more than her memories. Atlas ambled through the crowd, tail wagging as children patted his graying fur and elders called out greetings. He was a fixture now, woven into the fabric of Greenwood Oaks, a living testament to courage, kindness, and second chances. The ceremony began with music, residents and families singing, their voices rising over the beds of lilies and marigolds. Jessica listened, her heart full, as the survivors gathered in a circle around the plaque. Walter stepped forward first, his voice thin but carrying. "For a long time, I didn't think any of us would be believed. I didn't think anyone would care. But today, we're here, and we're seen. This garden isn't just for those we lost. It's for those who made it out, and for those who reached back to pull others with them." A hush settled as Ruth knelt at the base of the memorial, planting the first wildflowers. She pressed her palm to the plaque, tears glistening on her cheeks, and whispered something only she and the earth would ever know. Families followed, adding their own blossoms, laughter and quiet conversation blending in the afternoon light. Jessica was asked to speak last. She took her place beside the plaque, Atlas sitting close, his eyes trained on her, steady and reassuring. The crowd quieted. She began, voice clear, every word carrying the memory of what they'd endured. "Atlas taught us that real guardians aren't always the loudest or the strongest. Sometimes they're the ones who never give up, who sit with us in our darkest moments and remind us we matter. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened, it's about facing the truth together and building something new from the ruins." Jessica looked out at the gathered faces, Walter and Ruth smiling through tears, the families of those lost, heads bowed, the new staff who had come to serve, not control. None of this would have been possible if we hadn't refused to accept silence. Justice requires us to pay attention to the smallest bark in the night, to the quiet plea for help. Let's promise never to ignore the warning signs. Let's be the guardians our world needs and honor those who lead us, no matter how many legs they have. Applause swept through the garden, gentle and warm. Walter and Ruth took Jessica's hands, their fingers interlaced, their faces alight with something more lasting than happiness. Peace. As the sun slanted low, Atlas found his spot beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Children and elders gathered around him. His eyes drifted shut, body relaxed, breathing deep. He had become more than a companion or hero. He was the bridge, the silent healer who had brought them all together. Later, as the guests lingered, swapping stories, planting new flowers, hugging goodbye, Jessica wandered the garden, soaking in every detail. She knelt by Atlas, pressing her forehead to his, her heart full of gratitude. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "You did it." In the weeks that followed, the legacy of Greenwood Oaks spread beyond the garden walls. News stories ran not just about the tragedy, but the transformation. How one facility rebuilt from the inside out, how survivors became advocates, how Atlas's story inspired therapy programs in homes across the state. Jessica spoke at conferences, sharing lessons learned, not just about abuse, but about the healing power of connection, community, and animal companionship. In-depth analysis, core messages. Justice requires vigilance and compassion. What happened at Greenwood Oaks was not an accident. It was the result of apathy and fear. True justice comes only when ordinary people choose empathy over silence, action over comfort. The world, Jessica realized, is full of warning signs. It's up to each of us to notice, to care, and to act. The power of connection. Healing, for the residents and for Jessica herself, grew not from solitude but from community. It was in shared stories, in open wounds tended by gentle hands, in the presence of a dog who never turned away. Connection rebuilt what had been broken. Animals as silent healers. Atlas's journey showed that sometimes the truest healing comes not from words, but from presence. His loyalty was the thread that wove them all together, the quiet power that helped them trust, recover, and hope. As evening fell, Jessica called the group together one last time. She spoke softly, voice thick with emotion. If this story touched you, please like and follow our channel. Remember, healing takes courage, justice takes all of us, and hope can be sparked by the gentlest of souls. The final image, Atlas stretched in the sun, surrounded by laughter, the memorial garden alive with color, and Greenwood Oaks, a place of pain transformed, a living legacy of light.